Okay, so there is an interesting, I don't know, pattern or phenomenon where um, a lot of dogs, maybe even all dogs to some degree, get hotter as they're about to access the source of reinforcement. It's all of us really. When you're about to put the donut in your mouth, you're the most excited for the donut. And with certain dogs that just have tendencies and probably a certain kind of learning history, what can happen then with that is that because the human is delivering the reinforcer and their experience with accessing the reinforcer, there can develop kind of a hot zone, like a red zone, right around the human where they access the reinforcement the most, especially in a training context. And then we get a behavior pattern where as they're pushing into they push into this space because it's so magnetic, there's so much pull to it. And then it's because it's that hot zone, we get all this crazy, like hectic behavior, pushing behavior, and frantic behavior that can cause a problem in a training session. And it's also kind of not a whole lot of fun. And so to address it, we want to do a couple of things. But one of the things that we want to do is help define a less hot zone where the dog can perform their behaviors. And so there's a lot to this with, sort of along the lines of this is your dance space, this is my dance space. And the more we can define that space and of course, reduce or minimize the amount of practice they're doing being reinforced for that frantic, hectic behavior, pushing into the human space. So that's really good, right? But also we want to extend the reinforcement out away from that zone as much as we can. And so really kind of separating access to the reinforcement from the handler's body, from the trainer's body, so that we don't have this huge hot zone that's super concentrated really close to them. And so that's where I love using, effectively protected contact. And there's a lot of pieces that can go into this development, and I don't want to go into that right now. I want to talk about using a barrier between you and the dog. So I want to put that barrier far enough from the person so that the dog isn't coming into that red zone where they're getting frantic, and we're starting to create a little buffer space. So, hey, you can get reinforcement out here just as much as in there, maybe even more so. And they tend to, this is very sloppy language, but they tend to stay in a more thoughtful place when they're little, have a little bit of distance from the reinforcement, and particularly like that history of being in that space. So when I have a pattern like that, I really like to do a lot of work with the dog just outside of that zone. And so putting up a barrier is really helpful. And a lot of times I'll start with a true physical, like full height physical barrier, so that the dog is being set up for success. They physically can't go over there. So that could be, it could be a chain link fence, but it could also be an X pin. Potentially ring gates, although ring gate do tend to take a little bit of training because they're not as substantial, especially for a larger dog, or frankly for a very small dog. But then, we're able to fade it to a smaller, lower barrier. That's something where I might consider ring gates. And even sometimes later on, just like it's not even a continuous barrier, it might just be, like a couple of ring gates, or it might even be chairs or cones that define that space. And I think that a lot of dogs, and frankly a lot of people, find it easier to think when their personal space is defined and the dog's personal space is defined, and everybody's clear and everybody's on the same page about exactly where their space is. So if I'm using an X pin, because I want the dog to actually be able to move more often, I will put the person inside the X pin instead of the dog. If it's a situation where the person is more stationary, which is most of our training, the person is more stationary, the dog is moving more, and the dog has more liberty to move around, just more general space. But if I can arrange it so that it's set up, I really like just like a long length of fence. So if I'm using an X pin, I might zigzag it a little. I'm just kind of demonstrating so that it stays stays standing up, however many sections you have. Or you can prop it, or you can brace it in some way. Obviously, safety first. We don't want them to fall down. I mean, plus you should be wearing a helmet, of course, particularly if you're training very intense dog. Safety first. Wear that PPE. No, but propping it or setting up a barrier so that you have some room and it's long enough that the dog isn't immediately thinking, oh, I should go around it. Like, oh, my person accidentally left me on the side of the fence, I should go around it. If we have a long enough barrier, they won't think of that first. And so we have time to do a lot of reinforcing over here. And so some of the first things that I'll do in this situation are I'll just work on a basic treat tossing game. And I really will treat toss back and forth this way, right? Like, so further away and closer, and also side to side. And that's where having that longer barrier is helpful, because it's really nice for the dog to be able to go over here and get a treat, and then come over here and get a treat, instead of like if it was a very short barrier to go over here to get a treat and, oh, look, there's my person. I'll just come right around and, oh, we're having so much fun. I love training. Yay. My person loves training too. Maybe they might love training more if we had a good sense of personal space. And so we can develop a rhythm of, treat to here, treat to here, treat to here, treat to here. And it tends to get everybody on the same page, and we don't have that fuzziness or leaking that tends to happen when it's not clear. Even if you're trying to throw without a barrier, even if you're trying to throw treats, which is still good, that's still getting a distance, it's just very easy for that fuzziness, like I'm taking the treat here, but now I'm here, now I'm here, now I'm here, and now, oh, we're back here again, yay, oh, I love doing my training, it's so much fun, it's so exciting. And if we just have some concrete, defined space, it can go a long way to everybody just having a little bit of time to think. Now, if we need a little bit more time than that, that's where using the larger, chewier treat, something that has a texture and a size that encourages the dog to actually chew and swallow. So instead of like a little cube of cheese that they're likely to just gulp down in one go, or even just chipmunk, giving them like one of those larger cheese puff balls that you can get in the big jar, like at Costco. Those are big, and even large dogs will tend to give it a crunch or two, and because they're kind of dry, they stick a little, and you have to actually swallow them. And the time that it takes that dog to consume the treat gives the human enough time to take a breath and remember what they're doing next and get a cue in. And when you have a super fast dog, that's real. That's a real thing. And honestly, I think requiring the dog to chew and swallow for certain types of dogs also gives them a chance to think for a second. So their brain can catch up with their body, which sometimes isn't happening in training all the time. Now, for other dogs, of course, chewing during the training is the problem. They're doing too much of that. But I'm not talking about that with regards to this particular pattern of behavior that we're seeing in some teams. So you can still work on almost all of your behaviors. And in fact, by the time you've reduced your barrier down to even just like a piece of PVC on the ground, or I've used like the vinyl gutter, like downspouts are nice. It's just a little bit of a line. You can even do heeling with the dog next to you. They're not going to be quite as close contact as they were in if they don't have that. But again, if this is a dog that is pushing into your space so much that it's detrimental to the training, and they're getting really frantic and they're throwing a lot of stuff, and maybe they're squeaking and vocalizing. If you have a dog that's vocalizing a lot in training, this can be a helpful tool. But you can still work on a lot of stuff here. You can certainly work on positions, you can work on your chains, you can work on targeting, certainly reinforcement strategy. And then our long-term goal is, again, we want to be able to fade the barrier down, but it's still a tool we can have out. And because we've created this very concrete point of success, or really kind of zone of success, then what we try to do is make that bigger and bigger until that kind of hot zone is really kind of eclipsed, or at least diluted by all this reinforcement history that's happened other places and has different behaviors, different different emotional responses conditioned with it. And now it's a lot easier to do a lot more stuff without getting kind of sucked down that whirlpool of arousal. So give it a try. I hope it helps.